So I'd like to call the Boston Region MPO's UPWP committee meeting to order. So I'll start off by reading the accessibility statement here. So this meeting is being recorded. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, you can contact Kate White of MPO staff at kwhite@ctps.org or 857-702-3658. So we'll move on to introductions here. So I'm Ben Muller with the MassDOT Office of Transportation Planning, representing MassDOT. And then I'll just call out institutions here. MAPC. See anything here yet? Town of Arlington.
Daniel Amstutz, Town of Arlington, MPO member.
Thank you. BPDA. BTD. City of Framingham.
Erica Jerem, on behalf of Mayor Spicer.
Thank you. Town of Medway. City of Newton.
David Kozis, City of Newton, representing Mayor Fuller.
Thank you. Town of Norwood.
Good morning, Tom O'Rourke, Town of Norwood.
City of Somerville.
Good morning, Tom Bent, City of Somerville, representing Mayor Joe Curtatone.
Great, thank you. RTAC.
Leonard Diggins, Chair of the Advisory Council.
Great. And I think I saw MAPC come in while we were going down the list. MAPC.
Hey, good morning. This is Eric Barrasso with MAPC.
Great, welcome. All right, so at this point, we'll move forward to agenda item number 2, which is public comment here. Are there any members of the public who'd like to speak before the UPWP committee? You can just use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. If you're calling in, you can press *9 to ask to speak, and I'll call on you in the order I see you. All right, not seeing any hands raised right now. I know we had a written comment come in, Sandy. I hope all the UPWP committee's members were able to read that beforehand.
Yeah, I'm also going to put it in the chat.
Oh, great. All right, so seeing the comments, feel free to raise your hand during if you have any comments sort of as the meeting progresses, and you can also speak during that moment. So move on to agenda item 3 here, which is the summary of the May 6th meeting. Can I get a motion and a second to approve this meeting summary?
Motion to approve, Leonard.
I'll second that.
Great, thanks. So we'll do a roll call vote here. Ben Muller, yes. MAPC?
MAPC, yes.
I'll do names now that I have a list here. Daniel Amstutz?
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Erica Jerem?
Erica Jerem, yes.
David Kozis?
David Kozis, yes.
Tom O'Rourke?
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Tom Ben?
Tom Bent, yes.
And Lynn Diggins?
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Awesome. So we'll move on to agenda item number 4 here. The federal fiscal year 2022 discrete studies. I believe this is Sandy and Tegan.
Yeah, thank you. So we're going to lead into a little bit of a discussion here. You, with the UPWP committee, saw, discussed, and approved a staff recommended list of discrete studies to be included in the federal fiscal year 2022 UPWP at the committee meeting on May 6th. Since then, MPO staff have been further developing the state fiscal year 2022 CTPS and federal fiscal year 2022 UPWP budgets, and learning new details about available funding and allocation of staff time and resources. Today, we're coming to you with a revised proposal for discrete studies based on the financial realities we've learned over the last couple of months. As you know from the sheet that I shared with the committee by email, and which we'll display on the screen in a moment, this proposal cuts several of the discrete study budgets and deletes a couple of the studies entirely. We're asking the committee to review this proposal and decide whether to approve it as written or direct us to use the available funds differently, knowing that the available funding for discrete studies is approximately $120,000 lower than projected on May 6th. But before we get to that decision point, Tegan is going to explain a little bit more about how the budget situation has evolved over the past couple of months and how the overall UPWP funds are being used to help frame that discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. So I just wanted to give a little bit more kind of narrative context around how, as Sandy said, sort of how the budget, I don't know, information evolved that kind of ends up in us coming back to you with a lower than anticipated discrete study budget. Sandy's point that when we met back in May and we talked about our assumptions for available funding, that at that point in the year is actually based on historical information primarily. And while we knew that we would have a little bit less money, a kind of a very small decrease in available funding, we didn't really know the whole big picture and sort of what we would be working to include in the UPWP budget overall. So we gave you a first estimate based on historical information. And then since then, we've been developing both the operating budget for the state fiscal year as well as the UPWP budget for the federal fiscal year. So all of these things are moving pieces that are all, we're getting new information for them as we go through the months. A few kind of key areas that change. One, our overhead rate tends to change as we get more detailed information and decide more what our needs are for the coming year. And that affects what it costs to do projects because our overhead rate is part of the sort of the rate that is allocated to the work that people do for projects. In addition, we might shift around which staff we think are going to work on projects, and there are some salary adjustments. We make some assumptions, but things change a little bit. So overhead rate and staff salaries all change a bit, and then our revenue assumptions also change. So we put all that together, and then so this year, after we had gone through that process, and after we looked through the UPWP and sort of try to determine what budget we need for everything, the discrete studies come after that, and they come, usually we assign the leftover money or the money that we think we can make available for discrete studies, then we assign that to the discrete study budget. So a few things this year that affected our budget. As I mentioned, we had a little bit less 3C funding available, kind of our usual big pot of money that we're allocating to all of this work. It was only decreased by about 188,000, but it decreases and other expenses and staff salaries go up a little bit. So this has an effect. We also have a slightly higher overhead. Again, we need to invest in certain things like technologies as we're coming back to remote and hybrid, from remote to hybrid and in-person work. We have all sorts of things like legal fees and other things that just all impacted our overhead rate and bring it up a little bit more, which I still think is in a very low place. So we're still good on the overhead rate. It's just increasing a little bit. And then some of the ongoing study budget items that we have in the UPWP that we talk about before we really nail down what we have for discrete studies, some of those are changing. Some of those are going up a bit. And those are going up a bit primarily to sort of acknowledge that we have the strategic plan. We're trying to invest in certain aspects of our work so that we can really lay the groundwork. And I think the important link here is that by doing so, we're going to be doing more effective and better discrete studies as a result of that. One major area for that is in the regional model enhancement, kind of typical line item that we have to work on that model. We are currently, as part of our strategic planning process, building new tools that are going to better equip us to deal with uncertainty and to do better scenario planning for the LRTP and to do better work for our partners and stakeholders and to support these discrete studies when they do involve modeling work. So that line item is a little bit higher, and that also kind of relates to some of the recommendations we make about cutting certain studies here. We also have another line item that we had last year and we have this year about researching next generation data and tools, similarly linked to sort of evolving our practice and getting a better understanding for and kind of a better sense of the data sets that we can really use for effective technical analysis and planning. And then there's some increase in the professional development line item that we typically allocate out of the 3C budget, and that's to really try to bring staff capabilities up to the state of the practice in terms of project management training, communications training, and a few items like that. We've been working on that iteratively over the last year and in the coming few years. And then finally, the discrete studies that are the repeating studies that you see on this list. I think it's M1, M2, and M3. You also see slight increases, maybe not slight, but you see increases in those project budgets as well, which affects the overall available for other discrete studies. And that has to do with some of the continued sort of overlap and delay due to COVID, some bringing on of new staff as we look towards retirements. And then also we're looking into new analytical tools like microsimulation modeling, as well as new ways to communicate the outcomes of those studies to make them more available to the broader public. So that's a kind of a summary, may have been more than you wanted to know, but I thought it was just important to make sure that you knew that this context is there. This is something that's intentional. We understand that there's a desire to have more money for discrete studies. And there are certain things that we'd like to bring back to balance in the coming years. For example, any of the overlap and delay due to COVID, we should be, reverting back to expectations on that one. But otherwise, I think, while less money available, we hope to have more money available next year and better set up to do our projects really well. So I think I see David. I don't know, Ben, if you want to, call on people to ask questions, please feel
Yeah,
free.
we can go ahead and start going with question and answer. David?
Okay, thank you. So just looking at the chart, what jumped out to me, the first thing that jumped out to me was a reduction in the future of the curve, the phase 3, and sort of increasing the sub-regional priorities, which was something that we've been doing for a long time. It's, sort of more of the same versus just jumping into a topic that I think that we're struggling with more and more, probably across the whole region. Definitely here, it's something that we are constantly battling with. What are we going to do? Bike lanes versus delivery zones versus parking versus in-street dining, right? Versus bumping out the sidewalks. It's something that just seems more important, I guess, across the region than picking another study someplace. Maybe. So I guess I just want to make sure we're not shortchanging that kind of analysis here. It seems to be an indication of reducing it. I'm not sure, what that would mean for the final product.
Thanks, David. Is there someone on staff who can speak to sort of the scope of that task item and 70 versus 80? How that might impact it?
I think Annette or Paul. I don't know if Paul is here. I know Annette is here.
Sorry, I'm having a hard time unmuting there. Sure, it is a small decrease in the budget, and it just means that we would probably do less interviewing on that project. I don't think it would necessarily affect the outcome significantly.
I mean, I don't have any other way to comment on that. It was just something that jumped out.
Yeah, it's just scaling it back just a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, Lynn Diggins.
Thank you. I hear where you're coming from on the importance of that study, David. It might seem counter to what I'm going to suggest next, because my concern is about the zeroing out of the congestion pricing and the statement that some of the work will be focused under LRTP and modeling task budgets. Is that before the next LRTP, or is that something that we would start doing now so that there would be some work done on that, starting in this upcoming fiscal year, running through the development of the LRTP, and then but more than maybe, probably means something significant that would be proposed in the LRTP, so that we really do something meaningful with respect to investigating congestion pricing?
Yeah, so Len, we definitely keep hearing from board members and many stakeholders the importance of this topic within the broader thinking about planning in the region. And our intent in proposing a standalone study was to try to advance it, you know, kind of as a standalone item with a little bit more budget associated with it. Instead, the proposal is here, since that was also one of the studies that had, I guess I would say, maybe less consensus across all of the board members. We felt that this could be something that we could still advance a little bit less, I don't know if aggressive is the right word, but a little less, I don't know, aggressively, but still make sure we're working to build it into our scenario planning process so that we can still explore the idea. But we put this in front of you to get your reaction to it. And again, as the committee, you can, you know, make your decision on whether you like this reallocation of funds or whether you would agree on something else.
Yeah, just to expand on that a little bit, I mean, I hear where you're coming from. What I would like to see us explore is the possibility of giving it some funding, be it anywhere from a third to a half, and maybe pulling something from another study. As much as I like the let's see, the study on inequities, and I hope Betsy doesn't get upset at me too much, but I mean, I'm thinking that maybe reduce that one by half, and I'd like to understand the impact of that. I mean, whether we could spread that out maybe over a couple of years, or maybe another study that we could spread out over a couple of years, so that we can really make a commitment to the congestion pricing, because the arguments for doing it, I think, are compelling. And I have a hard time thinking about going back to people and saying that we're just not going to do this. I mean, with something kind of vague about what we're going to do later on. I mean, if we're going to do something later on, I feel that we need to be really specific about that, with an indication that we are making a commitment to doing it. So, because I mean, the commitment that I like to make now is that we're going to do some kind of study. I mean, and if we're not going to do that, then I'd like to make some other kind of commitment. But I'm just one person. I'm advocating very strongly, and if we don't agree with it, I'll still vote for whatever we decide to do. Thank you.
And if I can quickly just respond to one aspect of it, is that if you all discuss and want to direct us to do that, we'll also have to think a little bit and make sure we're very intentional that a smaller amount of money allocated to it would actually yield something that seemed justifiable. So we'd need to think about that scope a little bit more, I think, to kind of reassess that amount, in addition to the one that we would pull money from.
Right, I understand. I mean, yeah, I know it sounds simple, and I know it has ramifications. I mean, that might mean when you come back to us next week, if we decide to explore this, it would make me go, oh, well, that's not a good idea, and so be back to where we were. So thank you, Tegan.
Daniel Amstutz.
Thank you. And I think I'm sort of in the same camp with Leonard here. I'm sort of not surprised that it got zero out because, as Tegan was saying, somewhat lack of consensus, but also rather disappointed that this is continuing to get sort of kicked down the road, since this has come up at least in the last few years, I believe, if not before that, and sort of continues to be delayed, that we just don't have money for it, or something else is higher priority, when we've all talked about, and reports come out in the last few years about how challenging congestion is. And again, this is another tool that could be used, that other communities, other cities use quite a bit, and still don't really understand the entire resistance behind it. And I agree with Len. I don't find the notes to hear about some work being housed under the LRTP modeling task budgets. I don't really. I agree that I'd rather that to be a bit more specific about what actually would happen on this. Other than instead of coming back next year and being like, well, we didn't really do a whole lot, or something like that, and just again sort of continuing to delay any work on this. I think, to maybe what Tegan was just saying a moment ago, I sort of wonder, with the lowered budgets for like L1, L2, and L3, with the $10,000 budget for COVID recovery or TDM follow-up, what does that really get us? Or even for trip generation, I think trip generation is incredibly important, but what is $20,000 of a study going to get us? Is it really worth still putting such a small amount of money on those things? And then to M1 and M2, I sort of understood, Tegan, what you were saying about those needing to be increased, but I don't quite understand, or I'd like to understand more about like M2. It needs an extra $20,000 for, you had mentioned delays or something to do with COVID, and I don't quite follow that. So I don't know if you can provide any more detail, or if it has to do with, like you were saying, overhead or salaries. Yeah, but that's I didn't quite follow that part.
No, that's great. It's a little bit of everything, but why don't I give Mark Abbott, who manages the group that carries out those studies, an opportunity to say something, if that's okay, Ben?
Yeah, go for it.
Yep, thanks. Well, one of the things I want to point out too is that the proposed budgets aren't, what was proposed in May seems like a lot higher than what we're recommending now on July 1st. However, what was our existing budget for fiscal year 21 for like the LRTP quarters was actually $137,000, not 125. So what was estimated was actually decreased. So we're not increasing that budget by $20,000. It's actually only increasing from $8,000 from the previous year, which has a lot to do with salary increases and overhead rate. The same thing with the priority roadways study. That was budgeted at $137,000 last year. So that's actually taken a decrease in money from the previous year. So the budgets aren't going up that greatly from the previous year than what's kind of shown in this table that Sandy's put together. There's a couple of things we want to start doing with our projects, trying to expand how we present our results of the studies. We're trying to look into making them more accessible to different people and make the results of them a little easier to understand for the general public that sometimes reads our studies. So, but one of the things we're looking at is like story maps and things like that, how to convey our results a little easier and make more accessible as well. So we're always looking for new ways to look at things and also analyze things. So.
So if we also can, Dan, if we can also follow up with additional questions, but we should also comment or respond to your question about the L studies, sort of whether or not they're useful at that time. So I think, Sandy, do you have something to say about that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So I think I'll go with TDM first, since that's the one I'm managing this year, the first phase of it. And that we've allocated $10,000 to this year. And what we're doing is kind of hosting 2 forums on TDM and building a kind of a practice of collaboration with MAPC on TDM topics. And I think that's been really valuable. So what we're really looking for is just enough money to continue that process of building relationships and doing some public events, really to gauge the level of interest that the region and our stakeholders have in both MAPC and CTPS working together to do TDM work. So it really only needs to be a small budget line, but we are asking for a little bit of money to keep that work going and to foster that coordination. And for trip generation, also actually something that both CTPS and MAPC are working on together. And similarly, there's some technical work that's being done that can be housed partially under other budget lines, partially here. But also it's just the need to have a line to charge to for everybody to work together and kind of foster that coordination on this question of how to tackle trip generation questions.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, what Mark was saying about the M1, M2, I mean, that's sort of new information that I don't recall us talking about before. So that's, would have been helpful to know in advance, or I don't understand why the May 6 estimates were a little bit lower than what they were the previous year. Anyway, okay, I appreciate that. And yeah, I understand the TDM stuff is important to keep that going and trip generation as well. So those are my questions for now. Thank you.
Eric?
Hi, good morning, all. I just wanted to say, Tegan, thank you for that clarification, particularly with respect to the congestion pricing body of work. I'm happy that you feel that some of that work can still continue on in the sort of the planning, for scenario planning associated with the long range plan. I will say I do think it's really important for us to, as an MPO and for staff to stay on top of this and to really be able to think about it as we develop the next long range plan and discuss it. At MAPC, we've been doing more work to try to understand like the impact of parking and pricing parking in some of our studies. And when we model parking pricing, which is a type of, pricing, it's similar to a congestion fee where you add pricing into the transportation decision-making process. What we find is dramatic mode shift. And there's a lot of infrastructure proposals out there to try to address, mode shift and traffic congestion. I mean, we could spend billions of dollars on, rail infrastructure, and for a fraction of that, we could potentially have a similar impact through pricing. It's a politically challenging, topic, but I think investigating it, exploring it, understanding what the price is that actually changes behavior, how that could be incorporated, I think that's an important thing to have in the mix. So I just, I would leave it at that. But if staff thinks that we can continue this with the funds that are there, then I'm okay with it.
Steve Ola?
Yes, so I'm fully in favor of restoring all the money for congestion pricing. I think that's very important, needs to be done. I fully agree with the letter sent in by Josh and Stacy on that. And I said before, this is a study that should have been done a long time ago. And it should be something we should be implementing. So we can't put this off any longer. We at least need the study. We have to go through the study, for anything to happen with congestion pricing. It's very obvious that it's needed. It's worked everywhere else. And I think this is one of those, now or never kind of things. We have to do it now, or it's just never going to get done. I fully feel that whatever was said there in that notes thing is just not going to happen. I think the money should be taken out of M1 or M2. Some of those do multiple locations. So instead of doing 3 locations somewhere on that, you can just do 2. Those aren't that as time critical as the congestion pricing is. I think we do a lot of them, and we don't even have the money, or the towns don't even have the money to implement them right away anyway. So I think that take the money from one or both of M1 and M2 and restore the $60,000 on M5 to get that critical congestion pricing study going. Thank you.
Thanks. And Tegan, just since it's come up a few times, I guess, could we get some clarification on sort of the study concept for congestion pricing as proposed for the 60,000 and what work specifically we anticipate to be under the LRTP and modeling task budgets? Just to kind of get a little more clarity on that.
Yeah, so now you're challenging my preparation to talk about the study in detail, which I know we did in prior meetings. The focus for this one is making sure that we're identifying how, first of all, that we're exploring a number of ways in which congestion pricing has and can be implemented, and then exploring, making sure that our tools are sort of built in a way that we can actually appropriately analyze that in terms of a scenario planning process for the Boston region. So it involves some very specific digging into the hows, and then making sure that we can actually incorporate that meaningfully into our actual analytical modeling process. So it's related to the LRTP, it's related to the modeling work for sure, but it's we were intending to dig into it at a level of rigor that would make sure that we thought that it was an effective way to carry out the scenario planning and to understand, to Eric's point, things like better understand where we think tipping points might be, and making sure that that's really catered to the Boston region specifically and not based on, kind of the more anecdotal sense of how it's worked in other cities and towns. So I probably did a terrible job of that, I'm sorry. But does that give you any more sense of clarity?
I think so. I think just my impression in reading the congestion pricing M5 study concept was that it was sort of focused at this scenario planning for the LRTP, ultimately making sure that that process is well informed. So I think that's just helpful for people to make that connection with the notes here, that is kind of a one-to-one in concept, if not necessarily in scale.
Ben and Tegan, if it would be helpful, I can display the text that we have, the draft text that we have for that study on the screen.
Please do.
All right, 1 second.
This is one that it's hard for me to, there's a lot of nuance and depth to this work, as you well know. We need to be very clear about how it applies to us and make sure that we are providing realistic understanding of what the impacts of that congestion pricing could be. So as this text says, it's kind of looking at the different elements related to congestion pricing and diving deeper into all of those and thinking about how we can represent those in our scenario planning, but also potentially other, regional planning processes. So yes, it is intended to support the LRTP work. I would say this is a level, what's proposed in this study is certainly a level above and beyond what we would be able to do within our usual scenario planning budget, because this is a significant amount of effort to do. So this was kind of getting that jump start on identifying all of those things that when we got to the scenario planning process, we'd be able to incorporate it as effectively as possible. So it's not that it can't be looked at without doing this study. The study was intended to be an investment in making sure we could do that really effectively.
Okay. David Cousins.
Excuse me. Oh, okay. So Steve said something that I guess I was kind of thinking that, I don't know, maybe it is worth it to think about skipping for a year one of the M1 or M2 studies. We've done them many times. They're really great studies. I'm always very, very, very impressed with the work that's done. It's always 1 or 2 locations, and I thought, I don't know if there was any thought toward just skipping one of those for a year and sort of beefing up some of these other things that just feel more timely as we're coming out of this really weird time, with the COVID study or the future of the curb, like I talked about before, or in some way dealing with the return to congestion, although I still, I have still have mixed feelings about a congestion pricing. But, I'm not sure. I don't have, my feelings are not that strong about it, and I do trust staff to make a good recommendation. So I definitely would still be voting on whatever the staff recommendation is. But have you guys thought about just skipping for a year? That's a lot of money that we spend every year. Yeah, so that's it.
Sandy, do you have any comments on whether there were any discussions that you engaged in staff with on that topic specifically? I don't recall in the last number of years or when I was a board member, that topic ever becoming, a key part of this discussion. I know each year we were reminded about the kind of the regularity and the value of the studies, but I'm not sure if we ever talked about skipping or cutting back on them. And David, just before I let Sandy answer, I will say we will certainly have kind of a staff allocation nuances to deal with. If we don't do one of those studies, we need to make sure we're allocating our staff kind of effectively to the other studies, but we can do that. But just so you know, it'll also take a little more exploration on our part to sort of firm up what we think that means for the studies.
Yeah, I think what we've done since I've been doing this, and this is my 5th round, is just kind of have a check-in with the committee early on in the process and say, hey, do y'all still want to do these studies the same way we've been doing them the whole for a number of years now, and the answer has always been yes. I think the question now is like, if the committee wants to redirect some of the funding away from those recurring studies, the corridor studies, do we just not do one of the corridor studies, or is it a possibility, as Steve suggested, to do fewer locations in each of them? And I think that's really a question for Mark, is like, could we cut each of them by a little bit and still do some work? I mean, the committee can give whatever direction the committee wants, but I just want to put both of those possibilities on the table.
Yeah, can I add something here? Typically, in the past few years, the corridors that we looked at, for each project, we've been looking at a single corridor. We haven't been doing multiple locations because we've been trying to expand and do as much of the roadways as possible in communities instead of just segmenting portions of them that we've done in the past, type of thing. If the budgets get cut significantly, say 30 from each, just to, offhand, we would probably have to reduce the amount of roadway miles or segments that we look at in communities. So we wouldn't be looking at entire corridors in a community. We'd only be able to look at a segment of a corridor in a community, type of thing.
Thanks. I will add, just from sort of MassDOT's perspective, we actually recommended adding more to these budgets in our initial, during the initial solicitation. The outcomes of these studies are usually very useful for initiating projects, and those are projects both with the MPO programs and the MassDOT programs on the statewide side. So I think that's sort of the meat and potatoes of what the MPO's work does, is sort of gets us towards capital projects. So at least MassDOT finds these studies very valuable and would support keeping them where they are. Looks like, Josh, you've had your hand up for a little while. I think I'll let you speak here if that's okay.
Thank you so much, Ben, and thank you, members of the committee and staff, for all the work that you're doing in general and on this interesting issue. I have a few thoughts, and I respect that there was intention to be done at 9:45, so I'll be uncharacteristically brief. This is a politically charged issue. I'm sorry, of course, referring to congestion pricing, the topic of which you received the letter that I drafted with Stacy Rubin of Conservation Law Foundation, who couldn't be at this meeting. As I say, it is politically charged. It's very hard to get consensus in our somewhat calcified, highly calcified political environment in Massachusetts. I think that it is a bit of a third rail, bad metaphor, but just an issue where I believe that we are going to need the technical knowledge that we would gain from CTPS in order to make any progress on this important issue, which is just getting worse. I mean, it was the least surprising headline this week was that, traffic in the Boston region is still terrible, and it's just costing people thousands of dollars and countless hours of lost time. That doesn't talk about the health impacts of our congested roadways. And I feel that we need to be at a point where we are thinking of what knowledge can we bring to bear to leverage the capital investments that the MPO and MassDOT others are making, because we are just exacerbating a problem when we really need to be curing it. So I think that the technical knowledge we would gain from this study should be a priority. But in a climate of scarcity, I certainly wouldn't come into this meeting and say that we shouldn't be doing these other things. I'm always looking for what resources can we have, and it's somewhat appalling to me that you're dealing with a reduced budget at a time when capital investment needs are growing. We should be, if anything, spending more money on research to better inform our capital investment and planning. So if it's within the spirit and will of the committee to repurpose money towards solution-focused congestion pricing that would build on all the work that's been done at the Commission on the Future of Transportation and the study that Kate and others worked on at MassDOT, great. I would just say in closing two quick things. I would love to hear from people who oppose this study because I believe there was opposition to that irrespective of the budget reduction. And I really want those voices to be on the record. And the second is that, you know, I feel that in the interest of the people who are afflicted by congestion, I'll be coming to MPO meetings and or others will and talking about this. So the issue isn't going away, it's just getting worse. And I really hope the UPWP committee can find a way to prioritize and deliver some quantifiable impacts. Sorry to go on so long. Thank you again for your time today.
No worries, thank you. All right, so I'll call on Daniel and then Lynn, and then I think we'll need to start moving towards trying to make a motion.
Thank you, Ben. So a thought came to my mind. I'm just going to make a suggestion, maybe a compromise with regards to the congestion pricing that maybe will not be completely satisfactory. But you know, one thing I noticed under the notes for the two items that are zeroed out for Vision 0, it says, you know, study recommended in a future UPWP. And then under, you know, M5 congestion pricing, it says large study will be considered in a future UPWP. I'm not sure, you know, I would like this to say it is recommended for a future UPWP, or, you know, I think that for the next UPWP next year, that it should be something that's put onto, that is planned as a discrete study for next year, you know, ahead of, well, I mean, M1 through M3, once we do, you know, every year, but that the congestion pricing would be put ahead of other things, you know, sort of preloaded for something that we would do next year. And, you know, I think if the work that is currently ongoing or going to happen with the LRTP and the modeling can sort of support that or help to bring us maybe to a better point next year to say, like, here's like a very, you know, either the same study or more specific study, you know, that has these things within it. I think that would be, I mean, that would be better than again, just sort of punting this to another year and saying, well, maybe we'll look at it next year. So that's a suggestion. If we don't move around any of the funding, that we make the congestion pricing, again, sort of preloaded onto the UPWP next year. I don't know if that needs a vote or something, but that's my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Lynn?
Thank you. So a quick question and then maybe a motion. So in the past, before I was a member of this committee, we were told that the state was going to do a congestion pricing study. Did that happen?
I believe MassDOT generally points to the congestion in the Commonwealth report for that.
I'm sorry, so can you just repeat that? I just didn't understand it.
The congestion in the Commonwealth report from 2019, that's generally.
Okay. I got you. Okay. Look, I mean, I think one of the good things about doing this kind of a study is that we may find that there are ways to do it that are more effective. And in fact, I see it more as a study than anything else. I mean, in that we could determine that it's not the right way to do it, and or the right thing to do, or find better ways of doing it. So I think it's really worth it from that point of view. So, so what we're going to do here today was make a motion to approve this, and then what was going to happen next week? I mean, in 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks, we would then be voting to release or to support release of the draft UPWP for public comment.
Gotcha. So if we ask staff, to do some more work so as to find some money for this and determine the best way to do about this with minimal impact on the other studies, because I could see maybe reducing an M1 or M2 so that you just took out a study, not reduce the scope of any particular study. So instead of maybe doing 3 intersections, you do 2, but with maximum scope. I'd be fine with that. So then that means the staff would come back to us in 2 weeks with another proposal that we would then have to vote on. And then in 2 weeks or some period of time after that, we would then vote for release. Is that feasible within the schedule that we have available to us?
I don't think that would be feasible, just given that we have to get the UPWP fully endorsed and then approved by our federal partners before the new federal fiscal year starts.
All right, fine. All right. So
Yeah, I mean, the constraint here from the staff perspective is if we're going to stick to the release on July 15th, we need to post the document a week from today, which means we need direction basically today from the committee so that we can finalize the document.
So what's the latest we could get the document out and still meet our federal deadline?
I think from our perspective, the 15th is kind of the latest. Most of the other MPOs have already endorsed. Typically, it's endorsed by the end of June.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we're kind of stuck. All right. Okay. All right. I don't have anything else at this point. Thanks.
All right, and I think just looking at the time and at the agenda, Eric, would it be okay if we moved the MAPC use of UPWP funds to the 15th?
Yeah, I mean, I can also, I can kick an email to folks with the description of the MAPC piece, and I can field any questions both over email, and then we can have it on the 15th, even though that's sort of, we're going to endorse that day, but I can field any questions at that point. But if people have, you know, strong feelings ahead of time, you know, that I would just need to know that.
Yeah, I think that works for us. Tegan, did you have something to add?
Yeah, Ben, I just wanted to clarify, Len, I don't want you to feel entirely stuck. I mean, we put this forward because we thought it was a reasonable proposal given the conversations we've heard to date. You know, we don't want to play with this dramatically, ideally, but you can still give us direction to do something a little bit different than what is proposed here. The question is, you know, you can't meet again on the 15th to sort of debate and change it again. So we would have to figure out another process, but I don't want you to feel that, you know, you don't have agency as the board members to be able to sort of influence this outcome. That's very important to me.
And I just wanted to pick up on something Josh mentioned. I know I was one of the people more sort of opposed to this study concept being included. So I want to go ahead and be on the record as to why that is, both from a personal perspective and from a MassDOT perspective. I think from a personal perspective, you know, this is really looking at the long-range plan and looking at how to best evaluate the proposed investments in the long-range plan. But I think, you know, given this spring's discussion on the tip, we're not sure we're in a position to deliver on the commitments that the MPO made under the current long-range plan. And so I think there's sort of more pressing issues for the MPO specifically focused on sort of project development, project delivery, and technical assistance elements. And so spending sort of a larger budget towards an element of evaluation of the long-range plan at this time seems like it would run counter to some of those more pressing needs for the MPO's sort of day-to-day functioning. And then from sort of a more MassDOT perspective, I think given the conclusions from the Congestion in the Commonwealth report and from Commission on the Future of Transportation, you know, MassDOT's already moving forward on implementing some congestion elements. And so I don't think MassDOT would have particular use for the outputs of this study. I think it would be focused more on the MPO's work. And so from sort of MassDOT's perspective, there's not something concrete that would come out of this that would make our work much better on a day-to-day basis. And so those are sort of the reasons I'm standing generally against this study concept's inclusion, because, you know, with a limited budget, I think some of these others will give us more bang for our buck, both on those pressing MPO needs and for sort of more statewide needs. Tegan?
Sorry, I think I left my hand up. I guess the one comment I would make in response to that, Ben, is I think all of that is incredibly valid and part of what staff was taking into account in making this recommendation in front of you. I do think it's important for the board also, though, to remember the scale of time that the LRTP is focused on. So I do think there might be a difference in terms of when or how this might become, you know, useful or valuable. So it's just something else to keep in mind.
Great. Eric?
So I think in just the need to make a decision, I think I will make a motion to approve the staff recommendation as presented today.
All right, motion made. Any seconds?
Okay.
Second, if no. You're looking for a second, so David Koza seconds it.
But David, before you second it, if you don't want to second it, that's a strong signal that says people don't like what was presented.
No,
today.
I don't want to make a strong signal that I don't like this. I'll second this.
All right, any discussion or thoughts or suggestions on the motion on the floor? Tom Bent?
Just to go back to Daniel's thought on this, and I've been listening to this discussion, but really quickly, I agreed with Eric earlier on. One of my concerns on this is the $60,000 do this justice, especially are we really going to be implementing, looking at congestion pricing, and then what if we go ahead and do that, what other dominoes fall after that? Like, are we going to increase, mass transit, bus routes, all those different things, because you really can't do one without the other. But then, Dan, and then, Ben, your comments just now from Matt's perspective, made sense to me also. So, but I think at some point we have to make a commitment to do this if we're going to be the group that does it. So, but we could talk a little bit about, could we make this a priority into the next UPWP?
And to that point, I think there's potential, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sandy or Tegan, if to sort of formalize these notes about the work that's going to be housed under the LRTP task, to make that a little more explicit in that sort of permanent task description. So that might be something that can provide, I guess, a more firm commitment in our published documents to these efforts.
Yeah, we can figure out a way to formalize it either in the UPWP or in another document. The other thing that we can do is come back to the UPWP committee, both to have a discussion on how to scope that work and also to report on it even multiple times during the course of the year. Because I know I've heard from folks that this feels a little bit squishy, and if we want to be accountable to you all, as we should be, we can come back and present on what we actually are doing, in addition to kind of recommending this strongly for a future year, for next year's UPWP.
Right. Yeah, that sounds like it would be beneficial, just from the comments we've heard. So whenever we look at the draft for release for the next UPWP committee meeting, we can look to that chapter and see what text is there, and if we're comfortable with that, and if that expresses our thoughts. Steve, I'll call on you real quick, and then I guess we'll go through the roll call for the motion on the table.
Yeah, I'm not afraid to say that I'm not in favor of approving this as is. We need to make modifications to this. At least we need to get that congestion pricing studying going. Congestion is not going to wait around for us to decide whether we're studying it now or studying it some fuzzy time in the future. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. All right, so I'll go ahead and call the roll on the motion on the table, which is to approve the staff recommended list here. So Matt Stott votes yes. Eric Barrasso?
Yes.
Okay. Daniel Anstitz?
Daniel Anstitz, yes.
Erica Jerem?
Erica had to leave.
Thanks, Kate. David Kozis?
David Kozis, yes.
Tom O'Rourke?
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
And Tom Bent?
Tom Bent, yes.
Leonard Dickens?
Leonard Dickens, yes, and taking you up on your offer to talk to us a lot more about this. Thank you.
All right, so motion on the floor passes. I hope that's enough direction, Sandy.
Yeah, and we will certainly be sure to check in with the committee to get further direction and to make sure we're accountable to everything.
So we'll move on through the agenda. So agenda item 5, as Eric said, he'll be sending out some notes via email for our review. So please review those. And if you have any concerns or comments or questions, you can send them directly to Eric before the next UPWP committee meeting on the 15th. And we can discuss it in greater detail then. Agenda item 6, members items. Any other information folks would like to share before the UPWP committee? Okay, seeing none. So agenda item 7, the next meeting. The next meeting will be before the MPO meeting on July 15th, same time, 9 a.m. And at that meeting, we'll be talking about the MAPC program of work and looking at the draft UPWP to recommend release for public comment. And then, like Sandy said, that'll be posted a week before the meeting. So, dig in deep and make any detailed notes. And and I guess Sandy would probably prefer if you sent in something in advance as well. But but that's our last opportunity before the public comment period.
And Ben, can I add something?
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I do think that we've had a really robust conversation about congestion pricing here. I think it would be great if the full MPO board got a taste of that. And so I feel like any member, any participant, any member of this committee can kind of bring that up during the UPWP, conversation. Because this is, obviously this is a topic that a lot of us are really interested in. And, there's some disagreements. But I think to Steve Olenoff's point, like, I don't think this is an issue that's going away. And I think we need to grapple with it. And to Josh Ostraw's point, I think that the technical, skills that the Boston MPO has is really the group that can shed some light on this issue.
Thanks, Eric. That's a good point. So is there a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All right, so without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much and see you in 2 minutes.
Yes. Bye-bye.